HFY had witnessed the fall of 17 civilizations. The massive alien warrior, standing nearly 3 meters tall with chitinous armor that had deflected plasma fire from countless battles, considered himself an expert on species extinction. His 4 eyes had observed the final moments of proud races as they crumbled under pressure, their spirits broken long before their cities fell. The Zephyrian Empire had sent him to Earth for what they believed would be a routine evaluation. Another primitive species had achieved basic space travel, and the Empire needed to determine whether humanity posed a threat worth eliminating or offered resources worth harvesting. HFY expected to find the usual pattern: a species that had exhausted their planet's resources, turned their weapons on each other, and stood on the brink of self-destruction. What he discovered defied every model the Empire used to predict species behavior. The first human settlement HFY observed sat in what the locals called Syria. His cloaked ship hung silently above a city that should have been abandoned years ago. The orbital scans showed a metropolitan area that had endured bombing campaigns that would have convinced any rational species to flee. Buildings stood like broken teeth against the sky, their walls pockmarked with holes from artillery shells and small arms fire. Yet the streets buzzed with activity. HFY watched through his enhanced vision scopes as humans moved between the ruins with purpose that puzzled him. A small human female, barely reaching his knee height, led a group of juveniles through rubble-strewn passages. She carried supplies that looked medical in nature. The juveniles followed her without the hollow-eyed despair he expected from survivors of prolonged conflict. "Impossible," HFY muttered in his native tongue, mandibles clicking with confusion. His experience across 17 dying worlds told him these humans should be fighting over scraps of food, not organizing what appeared to be coordinated relief efforts. He directed his ship's sensors toward a collapsed building where humans worked with primitive tools to clear debris. The structure had obviously suffered a direct hit from some form of explosive device. Any reasonable species would mark the location as a loss and move on. Instead, dozens of humans formed bucket brigades, passing chunks of concrete and twisted metal from hand to hand with methodical efficiency. The alien warrior's attention focused on one particular human male who appeared to be directing the operation. The man's left arm hung useless at his side, clearly broken. Blood stained the makeshift bandage around his head. Yet he continued shouting instructions, pointing with his functional arm toward specific areas where the humans should concentrate their efforts. HFY had seen this type of scene before, but in every previous case, the survivors had been digging frantically for their own family members or valuable resources. This situation confused him. The bioscanners indicated no life signs beneath the rubble. The humans were not attempting to rescue anyone. A closer scan revealed the truth that made HFY's 4 eyes widen in disbelief. The humans were recovering bodies for proper burial. In 17 fallen civilizations, HFY had never witnessed a species that prioritized dignity for their dead over immediate survival needs. When resources became scarce and danger constant, every rational creature focused solely on staying alive. The dead became irrelevant, sometimes even a source of nutrients for the desperate living. These humans defied that logic. As HFY watched, the broken-armed human male stopped the excavation when they uncovered the body of what appeared to be an elderly female. The entire work crew gathered around as the man spoke words that HFY's translation systems couldn't fully interpret. The tone suggested ritual significance. Several humans made gesture patterns that resembled religious observances from other species, but their faces showed determination rather than despair. The alien warrior had studied enough dying civilizations to recognize the signs of species collapse. First came resource wars, followed by the breakdown of social cooperation, then the abandonment of cultural practices deemed non-essential for survival. These humans appeared to be operating in reverse of that pattern. Kethvar shifted his observation focus to another part of the city where his scanners detected unusual energy signatures. A group of humans had jerry-rigged what appeared to be a power generation system using salvaged components from destroyed vehicles. The engineering was crude but functional, providing electricity to a building that served as some form of medical facility. The aliens' tactical analysis systems immediately identified numerous security vulnerabilities in the human settlement. The power generator's location was exposed to attack from multiple angles. The medical facility had no defensive barriers. Supply routes between buildings crossed open areas that would be death traps during combat. Any military strategist would condemn the entire setup as tactically suicidal. Yet, it worked. Kethvar watched for 3 full solar cycles as the human settlement not only survived, but gradually expanded. More survivors found their way to the location, drawn by signals the humans broadcast on primitive radio frequencies. Instead of turning away newcomers to preserve resources, the settlement absorbed them. The humans somehow stretched their limited supplies to accommodate larger numbers. The alien warrior's confusion deepened when he observed the settlement's response to a crisis. A group of armed humans approached the settlement during the night cycle, clearly intending to take supplies by force. Kethvar expected to witness the kind of violent confrontation that marked the final stages of civilization collapse. Instead, the settlement's leaders met the armed group at the perimeter and began what appeared to be negotiations. The conversation lasted several hours, during which the settlement humans offered food and medical attention to the would-be raiders. By dawn, the armed group had integrated into the settlement's population. This pattern repeated itself multiple times during Kethvar's observation period. Groups that approached with hostile intent left as cooperative community members. The human settlement grew stronger through absorption rather than conquest. Kethvar's understanding of species behavior suggested this approach should have failed catastrophically. Generosity during resource scarcity typically led to exploitation by more aggressive groups. Yet these humans seem to have discovered a method of turning potential enemies into allies through sheer persistence of cooperative behavior. The alien warrior decided to conduct closer observation. Using his species' advanced camouflage technology, he infiltrated the settlement during a night cycle. His armor's adaptive surfaces made him essentially invisible as he moved between buildings, studying human behavior at close range. The first thing that struck him was the complete absence of the fear scent he associated with dying civilizations. Humans under stress typically produced chemical signatures that indicated desperation or panic. These humans' biochemical readings showed alertness and fatigue, but not the despair that marked species facing extinction. Kethvar positioned himself near the settlement's central gathering area, where humans congregated during evening hours. He listened as they shared information about resource locations, planned expansion projects, and organized work schedules. The conversations revealed planning that extended months into the future. Species on the brink of collapse focused only on immediate survival needs. These humans were building for tomorrow. A conversation between 2 human females caught Kethvar's attention. The older female was explaining to the younger one how to properly tend wounds using limited medical supplies. The lesson covered techniques for extending the usefulness of bandages, creating antiseptic solutions from common materials, and identifying signs of infection that required immediate attention. What puzzled Kethvar was the context. The older female was clearly injured herself, with a leg wound that would have incapacitated members of most species. Yet she continued teaching medical techniques to others while ignoring her own discomfort. When the younger female suggested the older one should rest and let others handle the medical duties, the response surprised the alien observer. "Pain is temporary," the older female said, her voice carrying calm certainty. "Knowledge is permanent. If something happens to me, you need to know how to help others." Kethavar had heard similar statements from warriors of various species, usually in the context of passing on combat techniques before death. But this human was not a warrior. The settlement's records, which Kethavar had accessed through their primitive computer systems, indicated she had been a teacher in the time before the conflict. She approached medical care with the same methodical patience she had once used for education. The alien's observation was interrupted by commotion near the settlement's perimeter. A human child had ventured beyond the safe area and triggered what appeared to be an explosive device left over from previous fighting. The explosion was small, but sufficient to cause serious injury. Kethavar watched as the entire settlement responded to the emergency. Humans dropped their current tasks and organized rescue efforts with efficiency that impressed the alien warrior. A medical team reached the injured child within minutes. Other humans established a perimeter to check for additional explosive devices. Still others prepared the medical facility to receive a trauma patient. The coordination happened without central command authority. Individual humans made decisions based on their assessment of immediate needs, and those decisions somehow aligned into effective collective action. Kethavar had observed similar coordination in advanced military units, but those required extensive training and communication systems. These humans achieved the same result through what appeared to be intuitive cooperation. The injured child's treatment revealed another aspect of human behavior that defied Kethavar's understanding. The settlement's medical supplies were clearly limited. Yet the humans used their highest quality materials and their most skilled personnel to treat someone who contributed nothing to the community's productive capacity. In resource-scarce environments, most species prioritized individuals who provided essential services. These humans treated the child as if his recovery was the community's highest priority. During the treatment, Kethavar observed the child's family members. The parents showed emotional distress that was understandable, but they also insisted on continuing their assigned community duties once the child was stable. The mother left the medical facility to help prepare the evening meal for the settlement. The father returned to maintenance work on the water purification system. This behavior pattern repeated throughout the settlement. Humans dealt with personal crises while maintaining their responsibilities to the larger community. They seemed to understand that individual survival depended on collective functionality, but they acted on that understanding without apparent resentment or calculation. Kethavar spent several more days observing the settlement's operations before expanding his reconnaissance to other human population centers. The patterns he discovered challenged every assumption the Zephyrian Empire held about species development. In the human settlement designated Baghdad, Kethavar found a population that had endured bombardment so severe that the city's infrastructure was largely non-functional. Water, power, and transportation systems had been systematically targeted and destroyed. Yet the humans had created alternative networks using salvaged materials and improvised engineering. The improvised systems were inefficient compared to original infrastructure, but they worked. More importantly, the humans who built and maintained these systems shared technical knowledge freely with anyone who asked. Kethavar had never observed a species that treated survival information as a common resource rather than a competitive advantage. In the human settlement designated Aleppo, the alien warrior found humans who had created a functioning school system in the ruins of bombed-out buildings. Young humans attended classes conducted by adults who had somehow preserved educational materials through years of conflict. The curriculum included not only practical skills like equipment repair and medical care, but also subjects that had no immediate survival value: art, music, and literature. Kethavar's analysis systems could not identify the evolutionary advantage of teaching non-essential subjects during a survival crisis. Yet the human children who attended these classes showed higher cooperation rates and better problem-solving abilities than those who focused solely on survival skills. The alien warrior's reconnaissance expanded to include multiple continents. In every conflict zone he examined, he found the same pattern. Humans who should have been broken by prolonged warfare instead demonstrated resilience that strengthened their communities. In the human settlement designated Sarajevo, Kethavar observed humans who had created an underground tunnel system to move supplies safely between areas controlled by different factions. The tunnels required months of dangerous excavation work with no guarantee of success. Most species would have attempted to negotiate with the controlling factions or relocated to safer territory. These humans chose to literally dig their way to freedom. The tunnel project involved hundreds of humans working in shifts around the clock. They used hand tools and improvised equipment to move tons of earth and rock. Cave-ins killed several workers, but others immediately volunteered to replace them. When better tools became available, the humans who had been working with inferior equipment willingly trained newcomers on the improved methods instead of jealously guarding their knowledge. Kethavar's final observation before returning to his ship took place in the human settlement designated Fallujah. The city had been subjected to repeated attacks using chemical weapons that most species considered too horrific for warfare. The long-term health effects of chemical exposure should have convinced any rational population to abandon the area permanently. Instead, the humans had organized decontamination efforts using techniques they developed through trial and error. They documented which methods worked best and shared that information with other affected communities. Humans who suffered ongoing health problems from chemical exposure continued working on decontamination projects, knowing their efforts would benefit others even if they could not help themselves. As Kethavar prepared his initial report for the Zephyrian Empire, he struggled to find appropriate terminology for what he had observed. The standard categories for species classification did not include a designation for civilizations that grew stronger under extreme pressure. The humans had certainly suffered massive casualties and infrastructure damage. By any quantitative measure, their civilization had been severely degraded, yet their social cohesion and cooperative capacity had actually increased during the conflict period. Kethavar's military experience provided no framework for understanding an enemy that became more dangerous when injured. 3 months after filing his initial report, Kethavar received new orders from the Zephyrian High Command. His observations had been classified as anomalous data requiring verification. The Empire's strategists refused to believe that any species could exhibit the behavioral patterns he described. They suspected his equipment malfunction or deliberate misinformation from the humans. Kethavar's assignment was extended indefinitely. He was ordered to identify the source of human resilience and determine whether it represented a genuine threat to Zephyrian expansion plans. The High Command specifically wanted to know if human cooperative behavior was sustainable or if it would collapse under sufficient pressure. The alien warrior decided to test human limits through direct intervention. His first experiment targeted the water purification system in the Syrian settlement he had previously observed. Using a micro-drone equipped with a molecular disruptor, Kethavar introduced a contamination that would gradually degrade the settlement's water supply over several weeks. The contamination was designed to be subtle enough that humans would not immediately recognize it as sabotage. Kethavar expected the water crisis to trigger resource competition that would reveal the limits of human cooperation. In his experience with other species, threats to essential resources quickly dissolved social bonds as individuals prioritized personal survival over group welfare. The human response defied his predictions entirely. When the first humans began showing symptoms of waterborne illness, the settlement's leaders immediately implemented rationing protocols. Rather than hoarding clean water for themselves, they distributed it based on medical necessity. The most severely affected individuals received priority access, followed by children and the elderly. Healthy adults received the smallest rations. Kethvar observed humans who were clearly suffering from dehydration giving portions of their water allocation to neighbors who appeared more distressed. These individual acts of sacrifice had no apparent evolutionary benefit for the humans making them, yet the behavior occurred repeatedly throughout the settlement. The water crisis prompted an intensive investigation by humans with technical expertise. They worked systematically through possible sources of contamination, testing equipment and procedures with scientific methodology that impressed the alien observer. When they identified the specific type of contamination affecting their system, they immediately shared that information with other settlements via their primitive communication networks. Within days, multiple human settlements were implementing countermeasures against the same type of water contamination, even though they had not yet experienced the problem themselves. This information sharing reduced the effectiveness of Kethvar's test across the entire region. The alien warrior's second experiment involved disrupting the settlement's food supply chain. He used electromagnetic pulse weapons to disable the vehicles humans used to transport supplies between settlements. The attacks were timed to coincide with the season when stored food reserves would be at their lowest levels. Kethvar expected the transportation crisis to force each settlement to focus on local survival, breaking down the cooperation networks he had previously observed. Instead, the humans adapted by reorganizing their entire logistics system. Settlements that could not receive motorized supply deliveries sent out walking parties to collect food from cache points established by other communities. The walking parties traveled distances that would exhaust most species, carrying loads that should have been beyond human physical capability. What amazed Kethvar was the persistence these humans showed in maintaining supply networks despite obvious personal cost. He watched individuals who had walked for days to deliver supplies to distant settlements immediately volunteer for return trips to collect additional materials. They accepted physical exhaustion as a normal part of community maintenance. The food distribution system that emerged from the crisis was actually more resilient than the original motorized network. Walking parties could navigate terrain impassable to vehicles and were not dependent on fuel supplies that could be disrupted. The humans had turned a logistical disadvantage into a strategic strength through sheer determination. Kethvar's third experiment attempted to break human morale by targeting their cultural practices. He used sonic disruptors to destroy musical instruments and communication equipment during times when humans gathered for entertainment and social bonding. His analysis suggested that eliminating non-essential activities would force humans to focus solely on survival, thereby revealing the selfish behavior he expected to find beneath their cooperative facade. The results contradicted his hypothesis completely. When their instruments were destroyed, the humans created new ones using salvaged materials and improvised techniques. When their recorded music was eliminated, they increased their use of vocal music and storytelling. When their communication systems failed, they developed more elaborate face-to-face social gatherings. Rather than abandoning cultural activities as non-essential, the humans seemed to treat them as fundamental to their survival strategy. They allocated time and resources to recreation, even when basic needs were barely met. This behavior violated every principle of resource optimization that Kethvar understood. The alien warrior decided to conduct a more direct test of human resilience. He identified a small settlement that had been isolated from the larger human networks by ongoing military activity. The settlement consisted of approximately 50 humans who had been cut off from external supply lines for several weeks. Their stored resources were nearly exhausted. Kethvar used his ship's weapons to destroy the settlement's remaining food storage facility during the night cycle. He calculated that the humans would face complete starvation within 5 days unless they abandoned the location or resorted to cannibalism. The human response taught him something profound about their species' psychology. When the settlement's inhabitants discovered the destruction of their food supplies, they did not panic or immediately begin fighting over remaining scraps. Instead, they called a community meeting to discuss options. Kethvar listened through his surveillance equipment as humans proposed various survival strategies. The conversation revealed that several humans had been secretly conserving portions of their personal food rations to create a hidden emergency reserve. Each individual had sacrificed their own nutrition to provide security for the group without coordination or leadership direction. The combined hidden reserves provided enough food to sustain the settlement for several additional days. During those days, the humans organized systematic foraging expeditions to identify any edible resources in the surrounding area. They shared knowledge about plant identification, preparation techniques, and seasonal availability. Humans with no previous survival experience learned quickly from those with relevant skills. What struck Kethvar as most remarkable was the complete absence of hierarchy during this crisis. Humans who had been leaders in the pre-crisis settlement deferred to those with relevant foraging knowledge. Teachers became students, and students became teachers, based entirely on who possessed information that might help the group survive. The settlement not only avoided starvation, but actually improved their long-term food security by developing sustainable foraging practices. They identified local plants that could be cultivated to supplement their diet and established preservation techniques to store surplus food for future emergencies. Kethvar realized that his attempts to break human cooperation were instead teaching the humans to become more resilient. Each crisis forced them to develop new solutions that strengthened their overall survival capability. The alien warrior decided to observe human behavior during a crisis he did not artificially create. Intelligence reports indicated that a large-scale military offensive was planned against several human settlements in the region designated Iraq. The attacking force significantly outnumbered the defenders and possessed superior equipment. Kethvar positioned his cloaked ship to observe the human response to overwhelming military pressure. The first phase of the offensive involved artillery bombardment designed to destroy human defensive positions and demoralize the population. Kethvar had seen similar attacks eliminate resistance from other species within hours. The psychological effect of sustained bombardment typically broke unit cohesion and triggered mass retreat. The humans reacted differently than any species in Kethvar's experience. Rather than attempting to hold fixed defensive positions under bombardment, small groups of humans moved constantly between concealed locations. They used the bombardment's noise and destruction to mask their own movement, turning the enemy's psychological weapon into camouflage for repositioning. When the artillery targeting eliminated specific buildings, the humans treated the rubble as raw material for constructing new defensive positions. They built fortifications using the debris from destroyed structures, creating firing positions that were more effective than the original buildings. The sustained bombardment clearly affected human morale, but not in the way Kethvar expected. Instead of becoming demoralized, the humans seemed to develop a grim determination that intensified over time. Their communication intercepts revealed phrases like, "They can break our buildings, but they cannot break our spirit," and "Every shell they fire shows how afraid they are of us." The second phase of the offensive involved ground assault by infantry units equipped with advanced weapons and armor. The attacking force had overwhelming numerical superiority and advanced tactical equipment. Military analysis indicated the human defenders should be eliminated within several hours. The battle lasted for 3 weeks. Kethvar watched in fascination as small groups of humans used tactics that no military academy would have taught. They treated the urban environment as a three-dimensional battlefield, using tunnels, rooftops, and building interiors in ways that confused attackers accustomed to conventional warfare. Human defenders who were wounded or running low on ammunition did not retreat to safety. Instead, they moved to positions where they could provide intelligence about enemy movements to other defenders. Humans who could no longer fight effectively continued contributing to the battle through reconnaissance and communication functions. The most remarkable aspect of the human defense was their resource sharing under extreme pressure. Defenders who secured weapons or ammunition from eliminated enemies immediately redistributed the supplies to positions where they would be most effective, even if that meant giving up superior equipment for themselves. Kethvar observed individual humans making tactical decisions that prioritized group success over personal survival. A human sniper with limited ammunition would choose targets based on maximum benefit to the overall defense rather than personal safety considerations. Medics would venture into dangerous areas to treat wounded defenders, knowing that maintaining unit strength was more important than avoiding personal risk. The attacking force eventually withdrew after suffering casualties that exceeded their operational tolerance. The human defenders had achieved a tactical victory against numerically superior opponents through coordination, adaptability, and willingness to accept personal risk for group benefit. During the post-battle period, Kethvar expected to observe the breakdown of cooperation that typically followed high-stress combat situations. Survivors of prolonged conflict usually experienced psychological trauma that reduced their social functionality. The human veterans instead became the foundation for an even more effective defensive network. Humans who had survived the 3-week battle shared their tactical knowledge with defenders in other settlements. They developed training programs that taught urban warfare techniques to civilians with no military background. Veterans who suffered from combat-related psychological issues were supported by their communities rather than abandoned. The battle experience had not broken the humans. It had educated them. Kethvar expanded his observations to include human settlements in different geographical regions and conflict situations. In the mountainous terrain of Afghanistan, he found humans who had maintained resistance networks for decades, despite facing opponents with overwhelming technological advantages. The Afghan humans had developed survival strategies that impressed the alien warrior despite his extensive military experience. They used terrain knowledge passed down through generations to establish supply routes that were virtually undetectable to advanced surveillance systems. Their logistical networks functioned in environments where most species would find basic survival impossible. What puzzled Kethvar was the age range of humans involved in these resistance activities. He observed fighters who appeared to be barely past juvenile stage, working alongside others who should have been too old for military operations. Multiple generations cooperated seamlessly in roles adapted to their physical capabilities. Young humans served as messengers and scouts, using their speed and small size to navigate dangerous terrain undetected. Older humans contributed tactical knowledge and equipment maintenance skills. Adults handled the physically demanding combat operations. Each age group contributed what they could while being supported by the others. In the urban environment of Belfast, Kethvar discovered humans who had maintained community organization through decades of sectarian conflict. Despite deep ideological divisions that had triggered violence for generations, these humans had found ways to cooperate on practical matters affecting their survival. The cooperation occurred at the neighborhood level, where humans with opposing political views worked together on infrastructure maintenance, child education, and medical care. They compartmentalized their ideological differences to focus on shared practical needs. This behavior violated Kethvar's understanding of tribal conflict patterns. In his experience, ideological divisions inevitably led to complete social breakdown. These humans seemed capable of maintaining functional cooperation despite fundamental disagreements about governance and identity. The alien warrior's most revealing observation occurred during a humanitarian crisis in the region designated Somalia. Drought conditions had eliminated most local food sources, forcing human populations to compete for insufficient resources. Kethvar expected to finally witness the breakdown of human cooperation under extreme scarcity. Instead, he observed humans organizing relief efforts that extended across tribal and ethnic boundaries that had historically been sources of conflict. Groups that had been enemies for generations worked together to distribute available food based on need rather than tribal affiliation. The distribution system prioritized the most vulnerable individuals regardless of their group membership. Children, pregnant females, and the elderly received food allocations before healthy adults. Humans from abundant regions traveled dangerous distances to deliver supplies to communities they had never interacted with previously. Kethavar watched humans who were clearly hungry themselves, giving food to strangers who appeared more desperate. These acts of generosity had no apparent reciprocal benefit, yet they occurred consistently throughout the famine response. The alien warrior began to understand that human resilience was not based on individual toughness or superior technology. It emerged from their ability to maintain cooperative behavior under conditions that caused other species to abandon social bonds. Humans seemed to instinctively understand that individual survival depended on group functionality. They acted on that understanding even when it required personal sacrifice, creating communities that became stronger under pressure rather than weaker. Kethavar's reconnaissance data revealed behavioral patterns that had no equivalent in Zephyrian military databases. Humans treated resource sharing as a survival strategy rather than a weakness. They invested effort in maintaining social bonds during crisis periods when most species focused exclusively on individual needs. The alien warrior realized that standard military analysis could not adequately assess the human threat level. Their resilience was not based on conventional strength that could be measured and countered through superior force. It emerged from social psychology that enabled them to adapt to conditions that would destroy more individually capable species. As Kethavar prepared his updated report for the Zephyrian High Command, he struggled to convey the strategic implications of what he had observed. The humans were neither technologically advanced nor individually formidable, yet their civilization showed a stability that had survived challenges that eliminated more developed species. The alien warrior began to suspect that the Zephyrian Empire's standard conquest protocols would be inadequate for dealing with human resistance. Humans who could maintain cooperation through prolonged warfare and resource scarcity would not be easily broken by conventional military pressure. For the first time in his career, Kethavar found himself uncertain whether the Zephyrian Empire possessed the capability to successfully conquer a species that grew stronger under attack. 6 months into his extended reconnaissance mission, Kethavar made a decision that violated every protocol in the Zephyrian military handbook. He chose to make direct contact with the humans he had been studying. The decision came after observing a rescue operation that challenged his understanding of rational behavior. A human settlement in the region designated Nepal had been struck by a massive earthquake that buried hundreds of individuals beneath collapsed buildings. The survivors faced impossible odds, limited rescue equipment, aftershocks that made digging dangerous, and time constraints that meant many buried humans would die before they could be reached. Any rational species would focus rescue efforts on locations where success seemed probable, maximizing the number of lives saved while minimizing resource expenditure. The humans did exactly the opposite. They concentrated their efforts on the most difficult rescue sites where survival chances were smallest. Rescue teams worked around the clock in unstable rubble, knowing that each minute spent in dangerous conditions reduced their own life expectancy. When aftershocks threatened to collapse the tunnels they had dug toward trapped humans, the rescuers refused to retreat. Kethavar watched a human female who had been digging for 18 continuous hours toward a voice calling for help from beneath a collapsed school. The building structure was completely unstable. Engineering analysis indicated that further digging would almost certainly trigger a secondary collapse that would kill the rescuer. She continued digging anyway. When other humans attempted to relieve her so she could rest, she refused to leave her position. Her explanation, captured by Kethavar's translation systems, revealed something about human psychology that the alien warrior had never encountered in any other species. "She's counting on me," the human female said, referring to the trapped child whose voice had guided the rescue effort. "I told her I would get her out. She trusts me. I cannot break that trust, even if it costs my life." The concept of trust as a survival mechanism puzzled Kethvar completely. Trust typically weakened species by making them vulnerable to exploitation, yet this human was willing to risk death to maintain trust with someone who could offer no reciprocal benefit. The rescue attempt continued for another 6 hours before the human female successfully created an opening large enough to extract the trapped child. The moment of success should have been the end of the story, but Kethvar observed something that forced him to reconsider everything he thought he understood about human behavior. The rescued child was not human. The child was a juvenile member of a species that humans typically kept as companions. The human female had spent nearly 24 hours in mortal danger to rescue what amounted to a pet animal. When other humans discovered what she had done, they did not mock her priorities or suggest that her efforts had been wasted. They celebrated her success as enthusiastically as they would have for rescuing a human child. Kethvar realized that human empathy extended beyond their own species in ways that had no evolutionary justification. They formed emotional attachments to creatures that provided no survival benefits and were willing to risk their lives to protect those creatures. This behavior pattern explained observations that had previously confused the alien warrior. Humans in war zones often refused to abandon domesticated animals, even when doing so endangered their own evacuation. They allocated scarce food resources to feed pets when their own nutritional needs were barely met. The breadth of human empathy began to explain their unprecedented resilience in crisis situations. Humans who felt emotional responsibility for the welfare of multiple species would naturally extend that responsibility to other humans, creating social bonds that remained strong under extreme pressure. Kethvar decided to test his understanding through direct interaction. Using his armor's holographic projection systems, he created the appearance of a human refugee who had been injured during recent fighting. The disguise was imperfect, but it would be sufficient for brief contact in low-light conditions. He selected a small human settlement in Syria that he had been observing for several months. The settlement was experiencing food shortages due to disrupted supply lines, making it an ideal location to test human responses to a resource-demanding newcomer. Kethvar approached the settlement's perimeter during evening hours, projecting the appearance of exhaustion and injury. He carried no weapons or supplies that would indicate he could contribute to the community's survival. According to rational resource management, the humans should either turn him away or accept him only if he could provide services they needed. The first human to encounter Kethvar was a male who appeared to be conducting perimeter security. Instead of questioning the alien's background or demanding proof of useful skills, the human immediately called for medical assistance and helped Kethvar to the settlement's aid station. Within minutes, humans were providing Kethvar with food, water, and medical attention without asking what he could offer in return. They simply assumed that anyone who reached their settlement was in need of help and deserved to receive it. The medical examination revealed the limitations of Kethvar's disguise. His armor's projection systems could simulate human appearance, but they could not replicate internal biology. The human examining him should have quickly realized that something was fundamentally wrong with his physiological readings. The human medic did notice anomalies, but her response surprised Kethvar completely. Rather than expressing suspicion or alarm, she assumed that the unusual readings indicated medical conditions she was unfamiliar with. She began researching treatment options for symptoms that did not match any known human ailment. For 3 days, Kethvar remained in the human settlement while maintaining his disguise. The experience taught him more about human social psychology than months of remote observation. The humans included him in community activities without requiring proof that he belonged. They shared their limited food supplies with him despite having no guarantee that he would be able to reciprocate. When work assignments were distributed, they gave him tasks suited to his apparent physical limitations rather than demanding maximum productivity. Most remarkably, several humans spent their personal time teaching him skills they thought he would need to survive in the post-conflict environment. They showed him how to repair common equipment, identify safe food sources, and recognize signs of various medical emergencies. These lessons had obvious value for community survival, yet the humans shared the knowledge freely with someone they had known for only a few days. HFY realized that human communities functioned as learning networks, where information was treated as a shared resource rather than individual property. This approach created redundancy that made the communities more resilient when individual members were lost to conflict or accident. On his fourth day in the settlement, HFY's deception was discovered by a human child who was too young to understand the importance of maintaining adult social conventions. The child announced loudly that HFY looked funny and talked weird and had eyes that were too big. Adult humans quickly hushed the child and apologized to HFY for the child's rudeness. They assumed that he belonged to an ethnic group they were unfamiliar with, and they were concerned that the child's comments might have caused offense. The interaction revealed that humans actively taught their young to respect differences in appearance and behavior rather than to fear them. This training created adult populations that could cooperate with unfamiliar groups instead of automatically treating them as threats. HFY decided to reveal his true identity to test the humans' reaction to genuine alien contact. He chose to do so during the evening community gathering when the maximum number of settlement members would be present to witness their collective response. He deactivated his holographic disguise and allowed his true form to become visible. The massive, four-eyed, chitinous alien warrior standing in their midst should have triggered panic and defensive responses from the humans. Instead, they reacted with curiosity and concern for his welfare. The first human to speak was the child who had originally noticed anomalies in HFY's appearance. Instead of showing fear, the child asked if HFY was sick because his skin looked hard and uncomfortable. Adult humans quickly surrounded HFY, but their body language indicated protective rather than aggressive intentions. They positioned themselves to shield him from potential outside threats while asking if he needed medical attention or assistance. When HFY explained that he was a member of an alien species conducting reconnaissance on human behavior, the settlement's response defied every prediction the Zephyrian Empire had made about first contact scenarios. The humans were excited rather than terrified. They immediately began asking questions about his home world, his species' culture, and the technology that had brought him to Earth. Their questions demonstrated genuine scientific curiosity rather than concern about potential threats. Several humans asked if there were others of his species who might also need assistance or shelter. The settlement leader, an elderly human female, asked the question that HFY had been dreading. "Are you here to determine whether we're a threat to your people?" HFY's military training required him to maintain operational security, but his months of observation had taught him that humans responded better to honesty than deception. He admitted that his mission involved assessing human military capability and social stability. The human response continued to violate his expectations. Rather than demanding that he leave or attempting to use him as a hostage, they offered to help him complete his mission by answering his questions directly. "If you need to understand how we think and behave," the settlement leader said, "then ask us. We will tell you the truth about what drives us to survive against impossible odds." For the next several hours, HFY participated in the most enlightening conversation of his military career. The humans explained their philosophy of cooperation in terms that translated clearly through his species' linguistic protocols. They described their belief that individual survival was meaningless without community survival. They explained that humans found purpose in protecting others, even when doing so involved personal sacrifice. They stated their conviction that any challenge could be overcome through collective effort and shared knowledge. Most importantly, they described their hope that other species would choose cooperation over conquest when contact became inevitable. "We know that space is full of other intelligent beings," one human said. "We hope that when we meet them, we can learn from each other instead of fighting. We have seen enough of war. We prefer to build rather than destroy." Kethvar asked directly whether the humans would resist if a technologically superior species attempted to conquer Earth. The question was essential to his military assessment, and he expected diplomatic evasion or aggressive posturing. The human response was neither diplomatic nor aggressive. It was analytical. "We would resist," the settlement leader said calmly. "Not because we want to fight, but because we cannot surrender our responsibility to protect those who depend on us. If your people need resources that Earth can provide, we would prefer to negotiate a trade agreement. If your people need a new home, we would prefer to discuss sharing our planet. But if your people insist on conquest, then yes, we would fight." Another human added, "We have learned that we can endure almost anything as long as we stay together. We cannot be broken by force because our strength comes from our unity, not our weapons. The more pressure you apply, the more tightly we bond together." Kethvar realized that the humans understood their own strategic advantages better than the Zephyrian Empire understood them. They were not naively optimistic about their chances against advanced technology. They simply accepted that some values were worth defending regardless of the odds. When Kethvar asked what those values were, the human response summarized everything he had observed during his months of reconnaissance. "We value the idea that intelligence should be used to create rather than destroy," one human said. "We value the belief that stronger individuals should protect weaker ones rather than exploit them. We value the hope that different groups can learn to cooperate instead of fighting over resources." Another human added, "We are not perfect. We make mistakes and sometimes fight among ourselves, but we try to do better. We learn from our failures and help each other become stronger. That is what makes us human." Kethvar spent 2 more days with the human settlement, participating in their daily activities and observing their interactions at close range. The experience confirmed his assessment of human social psychology while revealing additional aspects of their behavior that impressed him. Humans invested significant effort in activities that had no immediate survival value but contributed to long-term community stability. They told stories that preserved cultural knowledge across generations. They created art that expressed shared values and emotional experiences. They played games that taught cooperation and strategic thinking. These activities seemed inefficient from a military perspective, but Kethvar began to understand their strategic importance. Humans who shared cultural knowledge, emotional bonds, and cooperative experiences could coordinate effectively under stress without requiring formal command structures. When it came time to leave the settlement, the humans insisted on providing Kethvar with supplies for his journey, despite knowing that he could simply return to his advanced spacecraft. They treated his welfare as their responsibility, regardless of his ability to take care of himself. The settlement leader gave him a small, carved wooden figure that depicted a human child reaching up toward the stars. "This is to remind you that we dream of reaching space not to conquer but to explore and learn," she said. "If your people ever wish to visit us as friends rather than conquerors, they will be welcome." As Kethvar returned to his cloaked ship, he faced the most difficult decision of his military career. The Zephyrian High Command was expecting a recommendation about whether humanity represented a threat worth eliminating or a resource worth harvesting. The data he had collected suggested that humans would be nearly impossible to conquer through conventional military means. Their social resilience made them more dangerous when pressured, not weaker. Their cooperative instincts would allow them to adapt to almost any survival challenge. Their willingness to accept casualties to protect their communities meant that victory over them would require total extermination. More troubling was the possibility that contact with human philosophy might influence other species to question Zephyrian expansion methods. Humans who treated cooperation as strength rather than weakness represented an ideological threat to the Empire's fundamental assumptions about resource competition. From a purely military standpoint, Kethvar should recommend immediate preemptive action to eliminate the human species before they developed space travel capability that would allow them to spread their cooperative philosophy to other worlds. But Kethvar had spent 6 months learning to see the universe through human eyes. He had witnessed their capacity for growth, adaptation, and compassion under conditions that destroyed other species. He had experienced their willingness to extend trust and assistance to strangers, even when doing so involved risk. The alien warrior who had arrived at Earth expecting to find another dying civilization had instead discovered a species that challenged every assumption the Zephyrian Empire had made about intelligence, cooperation, and survival. Kethvar composed 2 reports for his commanders. The first was a standard military assessment that described human defensive capabilities, technological limitations, and strategic vulnerabilities. It provided the information the High Command required for planning potential conquest operations. The second report was a philosophical analysis that explained why conquering humanity might destroy the qualities that made them remarkable. It described the possibility that cooperation might be a more effective survival strategy than competition. It suggested that the Zephyrian Empire could benefit more from learning human approaches to problem-solving than from eliminating them as threats. Kethvar transmitted only the first report to his commanders. The second report he stored in his personal files, along with the wooden carving the human leader had given him. He had learned that some truths were too dangerous to share with those who were not ready to understand them. The Zephyrian Empire would make its decisions based on fear and military calculations. Kethvar could not change that, but he could ensure that complete knowledge of human potential survived somewhere in case future circumstances made wisdom more valuable than conquest. As his ship departed Earth's solar system, Kethvar took one final look at the blue and white planet where he had discovered that strength could emerge from gentleness, that survival could depend on sacrifice, and that the most powerful weapon any species could possess was the willingness to hope for something better than endless conflict. The hardened alien warrior who had witnessed the fall of 17 civilizations now understood that he had also witnessed the emergence of something unprecedented, a species that might actually be strong enough to choose peace over war, cooperation over competition, and growth over destruction. Whether the rest of the universe was ready for such a species remained to be seen,